Jenny Millers was a waitress at a small roadside diner in the quiet town of Kansas. Her life was simple, marked by routine and silence, a solitude she had grown used to after years of personal loss and disappointments. Every morning at exactly 7:15, a frail, quiet boy would step into the diner. He never said much, never placed an order, and always sat alone in the same corner booth. With a worn-out book clutched in his small hands and eyes that seemed far older than his years, he became a silent fixture in Jenny's morning shift. At first, she simply watched him with curiosity. But as the days turned into weeks, Jenny's heart began to ache for the boy. His clothes were thin for the season, his cheeks sunken, and he always looked around as if expecting to be turned away. Jenny didn't ask questions, she didn't need to. There was something about the quiet sorrow in his presence that reminded her of herself, of a younger version of her who had once sat alone, waiting for kindness that rarely came. So, without a word, she started bringing him a warm breakfast every morning, eggs, toast, and a small glass of orange juice. She never charged him, never pointed it out. She simply placed the plate in front of him with a soft smile, then walked away before he could say anything. It wasn't charity, not to her. It was compassion. It was a connection. And in those silent exchanges, Jenny found something she hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. In the days that followed, Jenny began to notice subtle changes in the boy, small, almost imperceptible shifts that most people would have missed. But she saw them. His shoulders, once tense and hunched as if bracing for the world's cruelty, had started to ease ever so slightly. His eyes, which had once darted away in fear every time someone passed too close, now lingered a moment longer, curious, tentative. He still didn't speak, but something about the silence had changed. It no longer felt like a wall, it was more like a door, still closed, but no longer locked. Jenny's heart swelled with cautious hope. Each morning, she brought him his breakfast with the same quiet care: warm pancakes stacked neatly on a chipped porcelain plate, a perfectly boiled egg, and a glass of orange juice with just the right amount of pulp, because she'd once noticed he left the juice untouched when it was pulp-free. He never asked for any of it, but he never refused it either. And on the third morning, as she set the plate down in front of him, he looked up, not just glanced, but really looked. Their eyes met, and in that brief second, Jenny saw something shift inside him. It wasn't a smile, not quite, but the corners of his lips trembled with something close to it. A spark of recognition. Gratitude. Maybe even trust. Jenny's breath caught in her throat. That tiny flicker of connection, so fragile it could vanish in a blink, meant everything. She didn't speak, didn't ask him questions, didn't press. She simply offered a soft smile in return, then walked away, letting the silence between them remain gentle and undemanding. After that, he began sitting a little longer. Sometimes he watched the other diners, studying them with an expression that was half wonder, half suspicion. Jenny wondered what he was thinking. Was he comparing this place to somewhere else he'd been? Trying to remember what it felt like to belong. There was so much pain still written across his face, but now there was also something else, the faintest flicker of life returning to him. Jenny, standing behind the counter wiping glasses or pretending to tidy the menus, kept her eyes on him without making it obvious. She knew the road he was on, one of grief, fear, or perhaps abandonment, was not something she could fix overnight. But if she could offer him even one safe corner of the world, even one consistent kindness to anchor him, maybe it would be enough to help him find his way back. That afternoon, the diner was quieter than usual. The clinking of cutlery and the low hum of conversation filled the background like a familiar lullaby. Sunlight streamed in through the wide front windows, casting soft amber streaks across the checkered floor. Jenny stood behind the counter, wiping down a coffee mug, when something caught her eye, something subtle, but different enough to make her pause. The boy wasn't just sitting there in silence like he always did. His usual guarded posture, shoulders hunched, eyes downcast, had shifted. His elbows were on the table, and in his hands was a small pencil stub. He was drawing. Not idly scribbling like a bored child, but truly focused, his brow furrowed, lips slightly parted in concentration. Jenny watched as his hand moved carefully over a napkin, each stroke deliberate and full of intention. She leaned forward ever so slightly, pretending to organize a pile of menus, but her eyes remained on him. What he was creating stunned her. He was drawing the diner, the very space around him, with a surprising level of detail. The table he sat at, the salt shaker, the glass of water with a lemon wedge, the sunlight hitting the floor. He had even begun sketching her, a faint outline behind the counter, her apron tied at the waist, her ponytail swinging over one shoulder. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful in its own way, raw, expressive, full of quiet emotion. The kind of drawing someone makes not to impress, but to understand, to preserve something meaningful. Jenny felt her chest tighten. She had spent days trying to get him to talk, to open up, to give her even a glimpse of what he carried inside. But here, in pencil on a napkin, was a part of his voice. Not loud, not clear, but unmistakably his. It was in that moment she understood, this was how he communicated. Through art, he could say things he couldn't bring himself to speak. His silence hadn't been emptiness, it had been observation, survival. The drawing was a sign that something inside him was slowly starting to thaw, to trust. Without interrupting, she quietly slid a clean napkin and another pencil stub across the counter and placed them gently beside him the next time he came in. She didn't speak, didn't comment, only met his eyes for a brief second and gave a small nod. He looked up, surprised, then gave the faintest hint of a smile. It was enough. As the days passed, the rhythm of their connection grew quieter but deeper, like the slow blooming of a flower unnoticed by the world. The boy returned to the diner every afternoon, his arrival becoming a part of the place itself, as natural as the clink of silverware or the hum of conversation. He no longer hovered at the entrance uncertainly. Now, he stepped through the door with a quiet assurance, heading straight to the booth by the window where sunlight spilled across the table like a welcome. His steps were still small, still cautious, but no longer hesitant. There was a subtle transformation in him, something unspoken, like the soft cracking of ice when spring begins to thaw. Jenny noticed every detail. She had grown used to the way his hands moved, delicate, precise, as they brought his imagination to life on napkins and scraps of paper. But what truly moved her wasn't just the talent he carried, it was the change in his expression. Where once there had been a heavy shadow behind his eyes, now there was something lighter, something almost bright. He still didn't talk, not much at least, but his silence had softened. It no longer held pain or fear. It had become a silence of comfort, like the quiet between two people who don't need words to understand each other. Jenny's care for him grew in small but meaningful ways. She kept a stack of blank napkins nearby, always ready. She would gently refill his glass without a word, or quietly slide a muffin onto his table, pretending it was just something extra from the kitchen. She didn't expect thanks, the look in his eyes was more than enough. And when he sometimes glanced up from his drawing and offered her a small, almost shy smile, it felt like the world paused for a moment, just long enough for her to feel the beauty in that simple gesture. She never asked where he came from or why he always came alone. Something in her told her that asking would break the fragile thread that held them together. Instead, she let their bond grow slowly, gently, like a song played softly in the background. And in return, he offered her glimpses of his inner world through his sketches. One afternoon, she noticed he had drawn a small scene from the diner, a coffee cup, a sugar jar, and, subtly, quietly, her. Just her hands, resting gently on the counter, captured with tenderness and care. It moved her more than she could say. In those quiet afternoons, Jenny felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, purpose. She wasn't just serving food or wiping down tables. She was bearing witness to someone healing. And perhaps, in that process, she was healing too. That day started like any other, but by the end of it, Jenny would realize something had shifted, something quiet but undeniable. The morning sunlight spilled through the wide windows of the diner, casting a golden glow over the checkered floors and stainless steel counters. Jenny moved with the same practiced rhythm she had every day, wiping down tables, greeting familiar customers, refilling coffee cups. Yet, despite the comforting routine, she found her eyes drawn, again and again, to the booth by the window. The boy wasn't there. At first, she brushed off the sinking feeling in her chest. He might just be running late, she told herself. Maybe he had somewhere else to be that morning, school, an errand, anything. But the longer the seat remained empty, the more anxious she became. With every tick of the clock, her concern deepened. It wasn't logical, after all, he wasn't her responsibility. She didn't even know his name. But the quiet bond they had formed, built on shared silences and passing smiles, had rooted itself deep inside her. By lunchtime, she was watching the door more than she was watching the grill. The bell above it chimed several times, each ring sending a flicker of hope through her, only to fall flat when it wasn't him. She tried to stay busy, clearing dishes, organizing condiments, checking the register, but her thoughts kept circling back to that empty seat. It wasn't just that he didn't come. It was the way it felt like something had been taken away. A presence she had grown used to. A connection, however fragile, that she now missed terribly. As the afternoon wore on, Jenny found herself walking over to his booth. It was perfectly clean, just as she always kept it, but it felt too still. Too untouched. She hesitated, then slowly slid into the seat where he used to sit, her fingers brushing over the smooth surface of the table. She looked out the window, seeing the same view he used to stare at while drawing, trees swaying gently, cars passing by, the ordinary world that he somehow made seem magical with the lines of his pencil. A lump rose in her throat. She had no reason to care this much, at least none that made sense to anyone else. But there was something about that boy, something that spoke to a part of her she rarely acknowledged. The part that remembered what it felt like to be lonely. The part that understood silence better than most. In him, she had seen a reflection of something she had long buried, a quiet longing for connection, for being seen. She stayed there longer than she meant to, just sitting, listening to the soft clinks and murmurs of the diner around her. And then, almost without thinking, she stood up, walked to the kitchen, and returned with a fresh muffin. She placed it gently on the table, right where he used to set his sketchbook. A silent offering. A small, stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd come back. When she turned off the lights that night, the muffin still sat there untouched, bathed in the silver glow of the moonlight through the glass. But she didn't throw it away. She'd leave it there again tomorrow,